In light of the December 13th, 2021 release of the major new work titled Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating, Profound Crises, Deepening Divisions, the Looming Possibility of Civil War, and the Revolution that is Urgently Needed, a Necessary Foundation, a Basic Roadmap for this Revolution, by Bob Avakian, revolutionary leader, author of The New Communism. The RNL Revolution, Nothing Less Show brings you a special screening of Part 2 of Bob Avakian's 2018 talk, Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Can Really Make Revolution, which gets into the strategy for an actual revolution in a country like the US. This talk is crucial, especially right now, a rare time when revolution can become possible. To watch part 1 of this talk, you can go to the December 30th special screening on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/therevcoms. And next week, tune in January 13th. Gather friends and family and spread the word about the Season 3 premiere of the RNL Revolution, Nothing Less Show. And now, here is Bob Avakian.
Two, how we can really make revolution. Many people, including many who say they would like to see a radical change in society, insist that revolution is not possible because they are too powerful and people are too messed up. Well, it is true that shaped as they are by this system, the masses of people in any part of society don't know shit and have their heads up their asses when it comes to an understanding of how things really are, why they are the way they are, and what could and should be done about this. But this stands in sharp contradiction to another important truth, that millions of people really do care about one or more, and many care about all of the 5 stops. This is a contradiction that we have to go to work on to move masses of people in the direction of the revolution that is needed to finally put a stop to those 5 stops and the horrific conditions to which the masses of humanity are constantly subjected. It is also true that the ruling powers of this system, with the machinery of death and destruction they wield to enforce this system, are indeed very powerful. But a big part of people's difficulty in imagining that we could actually defeat them is the inability to conceive of a situation that is radically different than the normal functioning of this system. A situation where, for large parts of society, the hold of the ruling class over people, its ability to control, manipulate, and intimidate them is broken or greatly weakened. Fundamentally, people cannot imagine this because they are not approaching things with a scientific outlook and method. As How We Can Win emphasizes, to make this revolution, we need to be serious and scientific. Now, some people, particularly among those most bitterly oppressed, are suspicious of talk about being scientific. They distrust science because truly terrible things have at times been done in the name of science. Ardea Skybrake, a professionally trained scientist and advocate of the New Communism, speaks to this in Science and Revolution on the importance of science and the application of science to society, the new synthesis of communism, and the leadership of Bob Avakian. She makes the point that one of the reasons that people are sometimes turned off by science is because there has been bad science. And she cites the example of how sometimes in the course of history, science has been used to promote the idea that some races are inferior to other races. But she goes on to emphasize that's junk science. In fact, you can use rigorous scientific methods to prove that was all bad science. It's not just morally bad, it is that, but it's also scientifically bad. It's completely false, and you can use good science to prove that. It is the good science, the scientific method and approach of proceeding from the evidence about reality to understand how reality actually is, why it is the way it is, and how it is changing and could be changed further, that we need to consistently apply if we want to transform the world to uproot oppression and exploitation. To dig further into what this means and how we go about doing it, let's begin with a statement from How We Can Win that everything we are doing is aiming for something very definite, a revolutionary situation where the system and its ruling powers are in a serious crisis, and millions of people refuse to be ruled in the old way and are willing and determined to put everything on the line to bring down this system and bring into being a new society and government that will be based on the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. That is the time to go all out to win. That is what we need to be actively working for and preparing for now. Key components and signs of a revolutionary crisis are that the violence used to enforce this system is seen by large parts of society for what it is, murderous and illegitimate, and that the conflicts among the ruling forces become really deep and sharp, and masses of people respond to this not by falling in behind one side or the other of the oppressive rulers, but by taking advantage of this situation to build up the forces for revolution. This underlines the great importance of ongoing work and compelling struggle to break people away from the hold of the political operatives and media mouthpieces of this system. I will speak more fully to how we need to be actively preparing now for a revolutionary situation. But first, in order to have the fullest sense of this, we need to work back from that situation and what would be required then, how the all-out fight would need to be waged to have a real chance to defeat the powerful, violent forces of this system. Here again, it is crucially important to approach things in a serious and scientific way. This is what is done in On the Possibility of Revolution, which, as noted in How We Can Win, sets forth the foundation, the strategic conception and doctrine for how to fight with a real chance of winning once the necessary conditions have been brought into being. On the Possibility of Revolution, which is available at revcom.us, is an important document that deserves serious study. Here I'm going to examine some of the key points that are gone into in depth in On the Possibility of Revolution and are summarized in a more concentrated way in How We Can Win. A big problem for the revolution is what could be called the encirclement and suppression of the people at the base of society who are subjected to one injury and insult after another under this system, and who yearn for an end to all this madness, but who are, in a certain sense, surrounded in the society at large by sections of people who do not directly suffer the same daily outrages. To put it simply, there are large numbers of poor and bitterly oppressed people in this country, but there is also a big middle class. Although much of this middle class is not doing as well economically as in the past, there is still a big gap between the middle class and the people at the base of society. And this big divide is one of the main reasons why people, even people who say they would like to see a revolution, but who just look at things on the surface and do not analyze the situation scientifically, say that revolution is not possible. And it is something that the ruling class and its institutions of repression and control have seized on in their efforts to isolate and contain, as brutally as they deem necessary, those whom they most viciously oppress and who represent potentially the greatest threat to their system. This is something these ruling powers would seek to do in an even more systematic and greatly intensified way in a situation where they were confronted by an organized revolutionary struggle aimed at overthrowing their whole system. It is one of the main obstacles the revolutionary forces would need to overcome in order to have a real chance of winning. Not only the strategic approach and basic operational principles, but also certain particular tactical measures of the revolutionary forces, including concentrating forces to repeatedly break through and break down the other side's physical encirclement of areas of revolutionary strength, would need to be developed and applied to address this major contradiction once the all-out struggle were underway. But confronting this basic problem cannot be left until the time when the all-out struggle is raging. This is something I spoke to in very plain and stark terms in the New Communism, where I emphasized that we need to transform this situation so that when the time comes, it's not going to be the case that they can easily contain this revolution to those sections of the people that they just as soon kill off anyway. And as is also emphasized in On the Possibility of Revolution, political and ideological work with this contradiction in mind would need to be carried out during the whole period before the emergence of the necessary conditions and the all-out struggle is launched. The more this work is carried out from here forward, the more the revolutionary forces would be able to counter and defeat the military encirclement and suppression of the strongholds of the revolution when the time came for the all-out fight. As I put it in the New Communism, a defining contradiction of this all-out fight is the fact that at the start, the other side would likely still be very powerful in military terms, although weak and in crisis politically, while the revolutionary side would be weak at the beginning in military terms, but strong and on the rise and having a great deal of initiative politically, which would then have to be transformed into initiative militarily. The operational principles and stratagems that are outlined in the final part of How We Can Win, speaking specifically to how we could defeat them, are particular applications of the approach to dealing with this contradiction. An overall principle that flows from this contradiction is the fact that once underway, the all-out fight would need to be protracted, but also finite. Protracted means drawn out. It would not be a situation where the outcome, if it were favorable for the revolution, could be decided in a very short period of time. Finite means having definite limits, not extended indefinitely. Given that at the beginning, the balance of power would almost certainly be heavily in favor of the forces of counter-revolution, the forces of the old ruling class and those fighting with it to defeat the revolution, in terms of their military organization and experience as well as their armaments, the revolutionary forces would need to draw out, protract the conflict for a certain period in order to transform the situation into one in which they could overcome those strategic disadvantages. At the same time, because this all-out fight should only be launched by the revolutionary forces in a situation marked by a deep and acute revolutionary crisis and a revolutionary people in the millions and millions, if it were protracted over too long a period, without the revolution advancing in a fairly limited period of time toward the situation where it began to have the upper hand, then the advantages of a revolutionary situation would tend to be lost. The overall initiative would return to the counter-revolution, and the allegiance of significant sections of society, including in the middle classes, that was lost by the old ruling class, would be regained to a degree that could spell defeat for the revolution. This touches on a very important point of strategic orientation. When it comes down to it, what happens on the battlefield will be decisive in determining the outcome. But for the revolutionary forces, one of the key objectives of the fighting would be to demoralize and disintegrate the ranks of the other side, both their actual fighting forces and their broader civilian support, leading to further loss of allegiance and of initiative on the counter-revolutionary side. And to the degree that this succeeded, it would be a key element in shifting the balance of forces in favor of the revolution. The all-out struggle will not just mean going up against the institutional forces of the old ruling class, but will also involve a civil war between two sections of the people, requiring the revolution to both defeat and disintegrate, but also, as far as possible, win over parts of the armed forces among the population that started out on the other side. Rupert Smith, a British military officer and strategist, has noted that, as he put it, an insurrectionary force that is defining the parameters of the conflict has by default presented an alternative force and power. What this means is that if a revolutionary force is to a large degree determining the character of the conflict, it will be seen not as a bunch of outlaws, but as a legitimate force contending against the old order. And this relates to why it is so important that the initial actions of the revolutionary fighting forces, accompanied by a bold declaration to the world, make clear that there is an organized force determined to defeat the forces of the old order and bring into being a new revolutionary system. This would play a crucial part in demolishing the superstitious awe that people have toward the existing system, the nearly religious belief that this is the best, or at least the only way that things could be, and that the power of this system is unchallengeable. It would further undermine the legitimacy and authority of the old order and its ruling class, and the allegiance to it of broad sections of the population, and lay more of a basis for winning over even broader sections, including from within the fighting forces of the other side. To begin, backbone forces, especially youth strongly committed to and actively involved in the revolution, would need to be transformed into organized fighting forces in key strategic areas and provided with the necessary training and equipment. Doing this would depend on the recognition that the revolutionary situation is clearly emerging. On the one hand, trying to do this before the immediate approach of a revolutionary situation would almost certainly lead to this effort being easily targeted and quickly crushed. On the other side of things, once a revolutionary situation were at hand, the shattering of the normal conditions and normal functioning of the system that such a situation would involve would make it possible not to easily and smoothly organize, train, and equip fighting forces for revolution, but to wrench out of the intensifying situation the basis for doing this. The point is that doing this without being wiped out would be a process of very intense struggle, but the dramatically new situation would provide the possibility for waging and winning this beginning struggle. Similarly, providing for the basic logistical needs of this revolutionary fighting force, to enable it to initiate the all-out fight without being immediately crushed, and then to quickly regroup and once again take the initiative and maintain momentum overall without being fixed and annihilated, would also involve intense struggle and would require defeating enemy blockades and attacks and penetration directed against strongholds of the revolution and focused on locating and destroying those who make up the revolutionary fighting forces and their logistical sources. All this would require misdirection and surprise in operations by the revolutionary forces. And all this would depend on millions more beyond the backbone fighting forces being organized concretely as reserves and as networks of support and supply for these fighting forces, and the willingness and ability of these reserves to absorb and protect the fighting forces and their equipment and logistical supplies and enable them to repeatedly regroup and seize the initiative and maintain momentum. This would also require continual calibration of the size of fighting units and their operations at any given time to enable these fighting units, upon completion of an engagement, to melt back into the larger revolutionary reserves, while at the same time the conditions are being created to allow them to remain active in training and in initiating further engagements with the enemy. The approach of capturing equipment from the enemy is important for any revolutionary force which starts out facing an enemy with an overwhelming advantage in destructive power and for some time a much greater capacity to produce more of this. But how we can win also emphasizes that utilizing equipment captured from the enemy must be done in ways that fit the fighting strategy of the revolution. Not all equipment that might be captured from the other side would be usable by the revolutionary forces. To try to use some captured equipment could put requirements on the logistical capabilities of the revolution that could not be met or sustained, and or propel the revolutionary forces into fighting in ways that ran counter to the necessary strategy, and or violate the basic principles and goals for which the revolution is being fought. It has everything to do with what the revolution is all about in the first place, as well as whether or not it has a real chance of succeeding, that how we can win emphasizes that the revolutionary fighting forces must always conduct operations and act in ways that are in line with the emancipating outlook and goals of the revolution. Still, in addition to developing means to enlist masses of people in creating equipment the revolutionary forces could utilize, ways could be developed to utilize a great deal of equipment captured from the enemy that are consistent with the strategic orientation, the ways of fighting, and the goals of the revolution. All this would be vital for the advance and ultimate success of the revolution. As stressed in How We Can Win, the revolutionary forces would need to fight only on favorable terms and avoid decisive encounters which would determine the outcome of the whole thing until the balance of forces had shifted overwhelmingly in favor of the revolution. This flows from what has been discussed regarding the overwhelming superior destructive force of the counter-revolution at the start of the all-out fight. What is also very important to underline is that this is not merely a question of orientation and intent on the part of the revolutionary forces. Given its overwhelming superiority of force for some time, the enemy would continually seek precisely to force the revolutionaries into situations where they would either be compelled to fight decisive battles that they were bound to lose, or else they would have to surrender outright, leading to the total defeat of the revolution, or putting it well on the road to defeat. The point is that being able to avoid potentially disastrous, decisive encounters with the enemy would itself be a matter of intense struggle, including that the revolutionary forces could often find themselves having to wage a determined struggle just to avoid being trapped in a situation where they would have to fight such a decisive encounter or surrender. This is why How We Can Win speaks of actively avoiding unfavorable decisive encounters and fighting only on favorable terms. It is why it also emphasizes that even when the balance of forces has shifted in favor of the revolution, it would still be necessary, when conducting operations aimed at achieving final victory, to continue to calibrate those operations so that decisive encounters are still avoided until the forces of the old order have been brought to the brink of total defeat, which would then be the time to finally rout and dismantle the remaining enemy forces. And it is because of the same concerns that How We Can Win, while speaking to the importance of building up political and logistical bases of support for the revolution, at the same time stresses that the revolutionary forces should not attempt to openly control and govern territory until the necessary favorable balance of forces has been created. To attempt to do so prematurely would make this territory, the people within it, and the revolutionary forces defending and governing it, highly vulnerable to attack from an enemy that again would have overwhelming destructive power. And it would put the revolutionaries in the position of having the responsibility and what, under the circumstances, would be an unsupportable burden to meet the basic requirements of a functioning society and the people within it. The point, the goal, is to carry forward the fight to thoroughly defeat and dismantle the forces of the old order, and on that basis to bring into being a new revolutionary state that can embark on the thorough transformation of society with the ultimate aim of overcoming and eliminating all relations of exploitation and oppression everywhere in the world. This ultimate aim and internationalist orientation of the revolution is also why How We Can Win speaks to the need for the revolutionary forces in this country to correctly handle the relation between the all-out fight when the time comes and the situation, including the character and level of revolutionary struggle in countries to the south and the north. As we know, this country was created through and amidst warfare. And as I spoke to earlier, it has continually expanded its territory and extended the reach of its empire through armed conquest, enslavement, and other forms of extreme exploitation. In carrying out the fight to overthrow the violent rule of this system, both as a matter of orientation and principle, and in terms of strengthening the basis for succeeding, it will be crucial to refuse to be bound by the borders that have been established and the walls that have been erected through the murder and marauding of the ruling capitalist imperialists of this country, but instead to actively unite with peoples to the south and the north in the struggle against this capitalist imperialist monster and advancing the revolution overall in this part of the world and in the world as a whole. In contrast to the revolutionary forces, the forces of the old order, especially when faced with the prospect that their oppressive system could actually be overthrown and dismantled, would resort to all kinds of barbarity to preserve this system. As it is put in On the Possibility of Revolution, it is not that the imperialists would hold back from bringing down terrible destructive force against the revolutionaries and the masses of people who supported them. Given their reactionary nature, it would be necessary to reckon with the fact that the imperialists would do this. But the decisive question would be whether, through doing this, the imperialists would be able to isolate and destroy the organized forces of the revolution, or whether, on the contrary, these barbaric actions of the imperialists would deepen the hatred of growing numbers of people for the imperialists, stiffen the resolve of those already supporting the revolutionary side, and win more of the people to sympathize with and to actively support the revolutionary cause. Here, another point emphasized by Rupert Smith is important. It is not absolute force, but utility of force that matters. It is not what any state or other armed force may have in its arsenal, but what it can actually utilize to its advantage in an armed conflict. One of the key operational principles of the revolutionary forces would be to wage the fight in such a way as to prevent the forces of the old order from being able to use their worst destructive power in a way that would be to their military as well as political advantage. At the same time, in the face of the barbaric actions that the old ruling forces would still carry out, it would be crucial for the revolutionary forces to turn the barbaric actions of the enemy against him, to win greater forces for the revolution, including those who come over from the ranks of the enemy, decapitating the leadership of the revolution, and destroying or crippling the means of coordination and overall direction for the revolutionary forces would also be one of the major objectives of the counter-revolution. How we can win correctly emphasizes the importance of relying on mass support, the intelligence this provides for the revolution, and the denial of intelligence to the enemy to counter the enemy's efforts to find, fix, and annihilate revolutionary leadership and key fighting units, and the importance of combining strategic direction and coordination for the fight as a whole with decentralized actions and initiative by local units and leaders. Here again stands out the importance of all the work from here forward to build the revolution among masses of people in many different parts of society. But it has to be squarely faced that when it comes down to it, even with broad and deep mass support, protecting leadership, in particular the top leading core of the revolution, maintaining overall coordination and strategic direction, and being able to rapidly replace leaders and forces that are lost, is and will remain a serious challenge. And this too must be actively prepared for and struggled for, including by bringing forward growing ranks of revolutionary leadership now, who are trained and tempered through the combination of being actively involved in building the revolution and becoming more and more deeply grounded in the scientific outlooks and methods of communism as it has been further developed with the new communism. This brings us back to the decisive point that everything that has been spoken to in terms of how we could defeat them when the time comes depends on winning millions to revolution in the period that leads up to the ripening of a revolutionary situation. So let's get deeper into what we need to do now. Let's go back to the crucial point that we need to be serious and scientific. A scientific approach and method leads to the understanding that the basis for revolution lies not in what most people are thinking or doing right now or at any given time, but in the deep and defining contradictions of this system, what is concentrated in the 5 stops and all the terrible suffering to which this system subjects millions and billions of people, which cannot be eliminated within this system. But this revolution will not be brought about magically or just by the way this system causes people to suffer. This revolution must be consciously and systematically built for, from here forward, with ever-growing numbers of people, first in the thousands and ultimately in the millions, who are brought forward into the organized ranks of the revolution to actively work for this revolution. How We Can Win lays out the plan and the means for how we can make this real. First, it is important to understand that although it is true, as I have said in the New Communism, that revolution cannot and will not be made just by spreading the idea of revolution around and perhaps getting some positive responses, thumbs up. At the same time, however, it is also true that spreading the word about this revolution can itself be very important revolutionary work, an important part of building the movement for revolution. The fact is that among those who really need to know about this, including those who most desperately need this revolution, very few have even heard about it. And they are living with the belief that this world as it is the only one that's possible. And for many, this means that on top of being subjected to continual brutality, degradation, and torment, they are suffocated by the lack of hope. Raising people's sights to the possibility of a radically different world can not only bring hope to people on a scientific basis, but can also awaken a potentially powerful force for the revolution that could make this hope a reality. For these reasons, we need to be on a mission to spread the word, to let people know that we have the leadership, the science, the strategy and program, and the basis for organizing people for an actual emancipating revolution. Here again is the importance of the point I emphasized earlier about the great strengths we do have and what is still missing. Masses of people who catch the worst hell under this system and those who were sickened by the endless outrages perpetrated by this system, who need to be brought forward wave after wave and develop into conscious revolutionaries and revolutionary leaders. Spreading the word, particularly as this is done together with others in a planned, systematic way, can be an important step in joining the organized ranks of the revolution and taking part in the process of building the revolution. A crucial next step in making this revolution real is that thousands need to get organized into the ranks of the revolution now, while millions are being influenced in favor of this revolution. Getting organized into the ranks of the revolution means acting together with others in a unified way, as an organized force, guided by the strategic plan and leadership for the revolution, building the revolution among broader masses of people, while also getting deeper into the principles, methods, and goals of this revolution, the basics of which are concentrated in the points of attention for the revolution. A key form of revolutionary organization are the revolution clubs, which live by, propagate, and fight for those points of attention. The core of the revolution clubs are people deeply committed to revolution who closely follow the leadership of the Revolutionary Communist Party, which has the basis in the New Communism to provide overall leadership for the revolution. But the revolution clubs also need to reach out to and involve growing numbers of people who are new to the revolution. The revolution clubs are a means through which people can take part in and powerfully represent for the revolution in an organized way as they learn more about the revolution and advance toward joining the party. Networks of people working together to spread the word about and organize people into the revolution need to be built and expanded in all parts of the country and linked together. In areas where the party and the revolution clubs have not yet established an organized presence, or in circumstances where people have not yet come into direct contact with this organized presence of the revolution, but have become aware of the core principles and goals of the revolution, They should reach out to and involve others they can draw forward around those core principles and goals. They should link up with the central leadership of the revolution for assistance and direction in organizing a revolution club among the people they are bringing into the revolution, on the basis of the points of attention for the revolution, which are included in the pamphlet, How We Can Win, and are posted at revcom.us. A crucial connecting link in all this is the party's website, revcom.us, and newspaper, Revolution, which sharply expose the crimes of this system, scientifically analyze why it cannot be reformed, and give guidance and direction for people to work in a unified way for the revolution. In everything we do, it needs to be kept clearly in mind and boldly put forward to people that whatever part of the country we are in, and whatever the size of our forces at any given time, we are doing all this as part of a national movement, together with people in other parts of the country, aiming to impact all of society and building a revolution to overthrow the whole system with the whole world in mind. An important principle and method in organizing people into the revolution is the understanding that while revolution requires serious commitment, people's level of commitment will, at any given time, essentially correspond to and be grounded in what aspirations have been awakened or brought forward in them, and what they are coming to understand is required in relation to that. And this commitment should proceed from what people themselves have been won, yes, through struggle, even at times sharp struggle, to see as a necessary and essential contribution to the revolution. People can start with basic tasks that they can readily carry out and feel confident doing, which make a real contribution to building the revolution. And they can learn to take on more responsibility as they gain more experience and a deeper understanding. The important thing is that they are part of the process of building the revolution, together with others. These principles and methods should be kept clearly in mind and applied at all stages of people's involvement with the revolution, to enable them to continue in advancing in understanding and commitment. At this point, when the ranks and the reach of the revolution are still way too limited, and a key immediate objective is to organize thousands into the revolution while working to influence millions, there is great importance to critical masses of organized revolutionary forces in different parts of the country, among those who catch the worst hell under this system, and among broader sections of society, especially youth and students. A critical mass means a force which, although it may be small at first, has sufficient numbers and determination to fight through obstacles to have a real impact on the political terrain. This relates to an important process that I discussed in the New Communism, accumulating organized forces for revolution. As I put it there, it's not just accumulate over here off in some corner. It's accumulate impact, accumulate further impact more, accumulate further, and on and on and on, even while taking into account the larger picture of what's happening out in the world. What do I mean by accumulate impact? I mean that when you have organized forces, you can have a magnified impact on political situations, such as protest and resistance, and on the political terrain overall. You are affecting the terrain by having organized forces united around a revolutionary line. It goes out to the world, especially in this age of the internet. It goes all over the place. And then people do want to know, who are those forces that did that? It's not that they all join up with you right away, or that you should bring them fully into the ranks of the revolution right away, before they even have a chance to get a basic understanding of what this revolution is all about. There's work and struggle that has to go on. But you're able to get this dynamic going where you're growing. You're wielding your organized forces for revolution in a way to significantly impact society and drawing people to you, and through struggle accumulating more organized forces. And then you're able to do more to affect the situation, once again through a lot of struggle. This is a dynamic we have to advance, while once again not narrowing our sights to just that dynamic, but looking at the whole world and how we affect the whole world toward the goal of revolution. This is the correct basis for understanding the point about the thousands and their relation to the millions. It's not just some vague notion of thousands of people who sort of once again go thumbs up on the idea of revolution, or even are very enthusiastic about it. If you're talking about leading millions, you need an organized force of thousands, a growing number of people in the thousands who are oriented, organized, trained, and led to be an actual revolutionary force and pole of attraction. And let me emphasize it again. At this point, even smaller but determined critical masses, particularly in some key areas, with this orientation and approach, acting as part of a national movement, can impact not just people in their immediate area, but also people more broadly in society, propelling forward that dynamic, leading to the situation where there are thousands who are oriented, organized, trained, and led to be an actual revolutionary force and pole of attraction, influencing millions and contributing to the basis to organize millions into the revolution when the conditions for this are ripened. This is all part of a strategic approach of hastening while awaiting the emergence of the conditions to go all out to actually overthrow this system. It is because we need to approach this in a serious and scientific way that we are awaiting, rather than just trying to jump off an armed struggle right now. To quote how we can win on this critical point, now is not yet the time to wage this kind of fight. To do so now would only lead to a devastating defeat. However, as pointed out sharply in the New Communism, this is different than the masses of people rising up spontaneously against their oppressors or defending themselves in a given situation. Anyone with a decent orientation should be able to understand why that is justified. And in today's situation, before the conditions have been brought into being for the all-out fight, we are not and cannot be just waiting passively, hoping that somehow the favorable conditions for revolution will just appear. No, we need to be working actively, vigorously, tirelessly to hasten the development of things toward those favorable conditions. This is what is captured in the formulation, the three prepares. Prepare the ground, prepare the people, prepare the vanguard for revolution. Get ready for the time when millions can be led to fight all out with a real chance to win. Here, it could be helpful to look at the similarities and the differences between the revolutionary process in a country like this and, on the other hand, what has happened in some third world countries where conditions have allowed the revolutionaries to wage an armed struggle from the beginning of the revolutionary process, to start by fighting battles against small parts of the enemy forces and to wage war over a long period of time to wear down the enemy and build up their own forces with the aim of reaching the point where the balance of forces has shifted in their favor, and they can then fight larger scale battles to finally defeat the forces of the old order. This does have some things in common with how the all-out fight would be waged in a country like this once the conditions for that have been brought into being. But there are important differences. In this kind of country, an armed struggle would not, should not, be launched until a revolutionary situation had been brought into being in society overall. And then this struggle, while having a certain aspect of being protracted, would also be considerably shorter, more finite, than the overall process of protracted revolutionary wars that have been carried out in third world countries. In a country like this, there needs to be a process of political, ideological, and organizational work to carry out those three prepares, to hasten the development of things toward the revolutionary situation, when it would then become possible to launch an all-out struggle with a real chance of winning through a somewhat protracted but also finite process. To summarize briefly, Third World Revolutionary Wars, armed struggle from the beginning over a whole protracted period to create the basis for the final decisive battles. Revolution in a country like this, a process of political, ideological, and organizational work to hasten and prepare for the development of a revolutionary situation, whereupon the all-out fight could be launched and carried out over a somewhat protracted but also finite period. In both types of situations, there is an aspect of awaiting as well as hastening. Even where revolutionaries in third world countries have been able to wage warfare from the beginning, they have had to wait for, while actively fighting to bring into being, the situation where they can successfully fight large-scale decisive battles. And in some cases, things have become protracted to the point of being bogged down without any prospect of success. In both situations, everything the revolutionaries are doing needs to be aimed at getting to the point where they can go all out to finally defeat and dismantle the violent enforcers of the old oppressive system. But the paths and the processes are different because of the different conditions. The point is that everything we are doing at all times is part of making revolution, actively working according to a strategic approach and plan to move things as fast as possible toward the time when it will be possible for millions to fight all out with a real chance to win. So with this understanding and orientation, how do we go about hastening while awaiting? The means for doing this is concentrated in the formulation, fight the power and transform the people for revolution. Let's start with the aim of all this, revolution. In Basics 3.1, I put it like this. Let's get down to basics. We need a revolution. Anything else in a final analysis is bullshit. That is another simple and basic truth. We need to go to people, not just one or two people, not just a small number of people, but masses of people, reaching all over the country and every part of society, straight up with revolution. Instead of just letting where they are at set the terms and trying to somehow bring in some idea about revolution within that limited framework. As Basics 3.1 goes on to say, we do need to unite with people in all sorts of struggles short of revolution. But it is frankly ridiculous to think that something short of revolution could solve all the monumental problems and monstrous outrages that people face under this system. On the basis of going to people straight up with revolution, then, coming from that place, we need to unite with people in fighting injustice and oppression and struggle to win more and more people to see the need and the possibility for revolution and to get with this. We need to protest and resist the injustices and atrocities of this system and win people to defy and repudiate this putrid system and its ways of thinking, and to take up the outlook and values and the strategy and program of the revolution, build up the forces for this revolution, and defeat the attempts of the ruling powers to crush the revolution and its leadership. As How We Can Win also points out, we have seen the potential for this in the protests that have taken place against police brutality and murder, and other ways in which large numbers of people have gone up against the established authorities and the political rules of the game. But How We Can Win goes on to emphasize that while such protest and resistance is important, this needs to be transformed into revolutionary understanding, determination, and organization. Transformed how? Through struggle. This goes back to the important contradiction that millions and millions of people really do care about one or more, and many care about all of those 5 stops. But in terms of understanding where all these outrages come from and what is necessary to really put a stop to them, most of the same people don't know shit and have their heads up their asses. So, while uniting with and working to bring forward still greater numbers of people in protesting and resisting the atrocities of this system, there is a need for sharp struggle to win them to confront and grasp the fact that in fundamental terms, this system is the source of all these horrors, and it cannot be reformed but must be overthrown. This is revolutionary work that must be carried out by continually growing numbers of people, organized into the ranks of the revolution and acting together in accordance with a common strategic orientation and plan. This must be done consistently, including in more normal times, whatever those are. And it is of heightened importance with every jolt in society, every crisis, every new outrage, where many people question and resist what they normally accept. We have witnessed many such jolts in recent times, including with the election of Trump-Pence and then the continuing atrocities carried out by this regime in power. It is crucial that all such jolts be seized on by the revolutionaries and others to bring forward growing numbers of people to become part of the massive, nonviolent but sustained mobilization that is needed to drive out this regime. But beyond that, revolutionaries must do all this to advance the revolution and expand its organized forces toward the fundamental goal of overthrowing this whole system. How we can win emphasizes that the organized forces and the leadership of this revolution must become the authority that growing numbers of people look to and follow, not the lying politicians and media of this oppressive system, not those who front for the oppressors and preach about reconciliation with this system, not those who turn people against each other when they need to be uniting for this revolution. What has already been shown about these politicians and media makes clear why sharp and compelling struggle needs to be waged to expose their actual role and win people to reject and repudiate what they represent. Earlier, I spoke to how there are the fascist and the mainstream sections of the capitalist imperialist ruling class. In a fundamental sense, capitalist imperialists, the fact that even with their very real differences, they all represent the same system of exploitation, oppression, degradation, and devastation. That is the essential thing and the essential reason why their authority must be rejected and repudiated by masses of people. As for those, posers in religious robes and others, who preach about reconciliation with this system and front for the oppressors, here is a variation on what I said in All Played Out. Reverends and the rest, not those who really stand with the oppressed, but those who strut and preach to keep the people down, on their knees, suffering indignities, who put the blame on those unfree for ways that they are kept in misery, pompous, self-righteous asses who breathe contempt for the masses, fools who worship the powers that be, insisting that things stay locked within the bounds of bargains with the bourgeoisie. People must come to see that this is all laid out. It is necessary and important to unite with preachers, with everyone who can be united with in the fight against oppression and injustice. And people who are attracted to the revolution while still holding religious views should be welcomed and involved, while at the same time the struggle needs to be waged to win people to a consistently scientific approach, which leads to the understanding that there is no God, and that trying to rely on a supposed God as the savior of oppressed humanity can only lead away from the real solution and ultimately leave people at the mercy of this merciless system. Many religious people say that they accept the conclusions of science, or much of this, while also insisting that science has its limits and that there is something greater than this, faith. But faith is belief in things not because they have been shown to be true, through examining what the evidence shows about reality, drawing conclusions from that, and testing those conclusions in practice in the actual material world, but because it is comforting to believe these things, or frightening not to, and because people have been conditioned to believe this by powerful religious traditions and institutions whose scriptures were written by human beings who were deeply mired in superstition and ignorance, and who, for that matter, advocated things that everyone today should recognize as depraved and barbaric, such as rape, pillage, and slaughter of innocents. In A Way with All Gods, I cited many examples of this, and people can also see this for themselves by looking without blinders at the Bible as well as the Quran. As I said in Basics 4.1, oppressed people who are unable or unwilling to confront reality as it actually is are condemned to remain enslaved and oppressed. And in contrast to that, a scientific method and approach leads to an understanding of the possibility of putting an end to slavery and oppression of every kind through revolution. It has been raised that when How We Can Win insists that the authority people look to cannot be those who turn people against each other when they need to be uniting for this revolution. It is talking about gangs, among others. Well, in making this revolution, we are not going out to make an enemy out of the gangs. We are working to win people to revolution and to build up the forces for this revolution, in line with what is concentrated in the points of attention for the revolution, to put an end to everything that enslaves and degrades people, including all the conditions that have led to the creation of gangs in the first place, and the situation where so many of our youth are fighting and killing each other. And let everyone decide where they stand in relation to this revolution that we are working for. But we need to struggle hard against the way of thinking that says it's everybody for themselves and you got to do what you got to do to get over on everybody else and get big bank and have lots of property, including turning women into property. All of this is just an imitation of the outlook of the oppressor, and it is a big part of what has kept masses of people oppressed and degraded for so long. Once again, All Played Out calls this shit out. I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. That craziness about being like Scarface, acting without a trace of humanity, plundering and violating without remorse, killing and dying for no good purpose. Give it up, it's all played out. In thinking about people who have gotten into the life, often from a very early age, I'm reminded of the lines in a song from back in the day by the R&B group The Whispers. Seems like I gotta do wrong, gotta do wrong, gotta do wrong before they notice me. Well, fuck they. To invoke a statement by Frederick Douglass from the days of slavery that very well captures the truth today, they are guilty of crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. All this relates to what I said in an appeal to those the system has cast off. Raise your sights above the degradation and madness, above the individual battle to survive and to be somebody on the terms of the imperialists, of fouler, more monstrous criminals than mythology has ever invented or jails ever held. Become a part of the human saviors of humanity, the gravediggers of this system, and the bearers of the future communist society. In opposition to those who mislead the people, the authority of the revolution and its leadership can be extended and strengthened as it brings to light through scientific analysis what is really going on in all the major events in society and the world, and where the fundamental interests of the masses of humanity actually lie, and as it mobilizes increasing numbers of people to fight for those fundamental interests. But building up this revolutionary authority will not happen automatically. It too must be consistently worked for and vigorously fought for as a concrete goal, an important part of carrying out the three prepares. You go out and you talk to people about revolution, and they say they don't want to hear that. You tell them to quit opening their mouth and letting the oppressor come out of it. This basic guideline is set forth in how we can win. We need to approach everything, evaluate every political program and every organized force in society, every kind of culture, values, and ways of treating people according to how it relates to the revolution we need. A revolution to do what? To end all oppression. Here again is the importance of the points of attention for the revolution, and winning more and more people to uphold, live by, and fight for this in building the revolution we need to end all oppression. We need to combine a firmness of principle and unwavering grip on the strategic goal of revolution with a broadness of mind and generosity of spirit. We need to work with many different kinds of people in building resistance against the crimes of the system, while keeping our eye clearly on the prize of revolution and struggling in a good way to win people from all parts of society to active involvement in, positive support for, or at least friendly neutrality towards this revolution. How we can win puts it in basic terms. We should unite with people whenever we can and struggle with them whenever we need to advance the revolution. And it gives a sense of the breadth of people that should be involved in this revolution. People in the inner cities and in the prisons, students, scholars, artists, lawyers, and other professionals, youth in the suburbs and rural areas, people in all parts of society need to know about this and seriously take it up. Again, there is special importance to the youth and students, both among the most oppressed and among the middle classes. Because even with all the bullshit that this system works to get the youth caught up in, they are less invested in the way things are and less worn down to accepting that this is the only way things could be. Another section of society among whom it is both possible and essential to win people for the revolution, tech experts, or what we might call digital wizards. This is important now and going forward in building toward the all-out showdown. And when it comes to that all-out struggle and how we could defeat them, it will be all the more important. Think about it. The orientation of winning people broadly to the revolution from all different parts of society also has everything to do with what this revolution is all about, as well as how we can have the best chance of winning. This closely relates to the problem of encirclement and suppression that I spoke to earlier. As How We Can Win puts it, we need to oppose and disrupt the moves of the ruling powers to isolate, encircle, brutalize, mass incarcerate, and murderously repress the people who have the hardest life under this system and who most need this revolution. We need to encircle them by bringing forth wave upon wave of people rising up in determined opposition to this system. Going back to what it was said earlier about what is the same and what is different in terms of this revolution and revolutionary wars that have been waged in third world countries, we should not be attempting to wage a literal military war against these ruling powers now. But we do need to be waging now a determined political war against them, to in fact encircle and isolate them, precisely through bringing forth wave upon wave of people rising up in determined opposition to this system, exposing the real nature of this system and the consequences of its rule, and in the process winning increasing numbers of people to recognize that its authority and rule over society is unjust and illegitimate and must be rejected and opposed. This, too, must be taken up as a clear and definite goal and fought for systematically as a crucial part of hastening while awaiting and carrying out the three prepares. And this political battle also needs to be waged in bold and determined opposition to the base that is being mobilized by the fascist section of the ruling class. This is important in its own right now and is important preparation for and will have an important bearing on the civil war between two sections of the people once conditions have fully ripened and the all-out struggle is underway. As a decisive part of all this, we need to confront and wage a determined fight to defeat the moves of the ruling powers to attack and destroy this movement for revolution, and in particular the leadership, transforming this into further advances for the revolution. As the brutally dictatorial nature of their rule is exposed and the repression they carry out is turned back against them, with growing numbers of people compelled to shed illusions about the nature of this system and its ruling class, and propelled into resistance against its oppression and repression. To come back then to the most fundamental point, all this is aiming for something very definite, a revolutionary situation. What we are doing now is making revolution. It is all part of and must be consciously and systematically carried out as an overall strategic plan and approach to getting to the point where millions can be brought forward to wage the all-out fight to overthrow this system with a real chance of winning. A great immediate challenge that bears heavily on the prospects for revolution is what is represented by the Trump-Pence regime. In another talk, the Trump-Pence regime must go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible. I have spoken to how this is in fact a fascist regime, the basis on which it has risen to power in this country. How, so long as it remains in power, this regime will commit ever greater atrocities and poses a very real threat to the future and very existence of humanity through its assaults on the environment and its arsenals of nuclear annihilation. And why, in the name of humanity, it is necessary and how it is possible to force the removal of this regime through a massive, nonviolent, but sustained mobilization of people demanding that this regime must go. Here I'm going to speak to the relation between this and the fundamental goal of revolution. If this regime is able to further consolidate its power and more fully implement its horrific agenda, the prospects for revolution could then be greatly set back, and the conscious revolutionary forces decimated or completely destroyed at least for a time. On the other hand, if a mass movement is built to drive out this regime, and if the revolutionaries work to build this movement from the perspective of how it relates to the revolution that is needed as the fundamental solution, then the situation in society and the world will become much more favorable for the fight against injustice and oppression, and crucial advances can be made toward the overthrow of the whole system. To a significant degree now, the conflict between the sections of society upholding this fascism and those opposing it from various different perspectives is shaping the terrain on which the struggle for revolution must be carried out. This conflict is likely to intensify and could erupt further in violent confrontation. And in any case, it would be a significant factor in the context of an all-out struggle between revolution and counter-revolution. The relation between the struggle against this fascist regime and building the revolution is not a straight road or a one-way street. It must not be approached by those who understand the need for revolution as if first we must build a mass movement to drive out this regime, and then we can turn our attention to working directly for revolution. No. It is crucial to unite and mobilize people from different perspectives very broadly around the demand that this regime must go. But it will be much more difficult to do this on the scale and with the determination that is required to meet this objective if there are not at the same time greater and greater numbers of people who have been brought forward around the understanding that it is necessary to put an end not only to this regime, but to the system out of whose deep and defining contradictions this regime has arisen. A system which by its very nature has imposed and will continue to impose horrific and completely unnecessary suffering on the masses of humanity until this system itself is abolished. And the more that people are brought forward to be consciously, actively working for a revolution, the growing strength and moral authority of this revolutionary force will in turn strengthen the resolve of growing numbers of people to drive out this fascist regime now in power, even as many will not be, and some will perhaps never be, won to revolution. So, both to meet the immediate challenge of creating a political situation in which this regime will be removed from power, and in which the political initiative has been seized to a great degree by those who are determined to turn back the assault on humanity that is being carried out by this regime and to strive for a better world, however they understand that, and to advance toward the fundamental goal of revolution, it is vitally important that all those who have come to understand the need for revolution actively contribute to building the movement to drive out this regime, and do so from the perspective and in the overall framework of building for revolution. Facing these monumental challenges and looking toward these world historic objectives, with the small forces that are right now part of the revolution, how do we go forward from here to rise to what the fundamental needs of humanity require of us? Starting with those of us who have come to see not just that this revolution could bring a much better world into being, but also that this revolution is urgently needed and is possible, drawing guidance from the website revcom.us and Revolution newspaper to act on the basis of a unified understanding and approach, using how we can win as a basic guideline, and what has been gone into more fully in this talk as a further elaboration of this, and using the film that will be made of this talk and the film The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go as important tools, while digging into basics and other key works of the new communism to get a continually deeper grounding in the scientific method and approach to revolution. we go to work to build this revolution. Spread this revolution everywhere. Organize people into the ranks of the revolution and give them the ways to work for this revolution, fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution, carrying out those three prepares, to in turn further spread this revolution with more people actively doing so, organizing more people into the ranks of the revolution, working actively for this revolution, to once again spread this revolution even further throughout society. Through all the challenges and difficulties, and in the face of the attempts by the powers that be to derail and crush this revolution and its leadership, advance towards a situation where the system is in a deep and acute crisis and millions of people refuse to be ruled in the old way and are willing and determined to put everything on the line to bring down this system and bring into being a society and government that will be based on the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. Revolution is possible, and we have to go to work to make it real. So let me end with what is powerfully stated in the conclusion of how we can win. All this depends on winning millions to revolution in the period that leads up to the ripening of a revolutionary situation. The chance to defeat them when the time comes, the chance to be rid of this system and bring something far better into being, has everything to do with what we do now. Everyone who hungers for a radically different world, free of exploitation and oppression and all the needless suffering caused by this system, needs to work now with a fire determination to make this happen, so we will have a real chance to win.